Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on the place where are you connecting. Welcome, everybody, to our ASPM Coffee Talk webinar of today. We are thrilled to have you join us today. I'm Jesus Cuadrado, Chief Product Officer at 𝐖𝐢𝐥𝐥𝐢𝐚𝐦. We have an exciting discussion ahead with two distinguished experts in the field of application security. First, let me introduce James Berzotti, a seasoned professional with more than 10 years of experience in technology and a pioneer in the DevSecOps as founder of 𝐖𝐢𝐥𝐥𝐢𝐚𝐦. Okay, and also we have with us William Palm, an application security solutions architect at Tenable, who brings a wealth of practical experience from working with a diverse range of clients and customers. So thank you for being here also to you. Let's dive into the world of application security post 2.
Of course, thanks for having us. I'm still getting over how good that intro music was. I was over here jamming out with it.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, thanks for the invite. Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. So just to start, okay, and to start the discussion and to put some context. For example, I would like to start asking to James and to William about your view on why do you think that, or what's the critical importance on application security posture management, the ASPM, in the today's cybersecurity landscape. Okay, I don't know, James, for example, you have a lot of background in engineering and security. I know maybe you could start sharing your perspective on this area. What's your view on why this is so relevant for the organizations today?
Yeah, I really think it's the convergence of a few different things that have made it get to this point. The first is the nature of like cloud architectures and DevOps as a deployment methodology, like specifically CI/CD, and how the amount of open source consumption combined with the amount of just code getting deployed on such a rapid basis. And then new things like scanning Docker files, as well as Terraform, like the number of different things to scan have also increased the need for many different scanners. And that of course didn't happen all at once, right? No one was sitting around going, oh, I should make an all-in-one thing that can scan Terraform, Docker files, package JSONs, like all these different files. And so I think really we're just now at the point where cloud architecture and ephemeral workloads are mostly getting figured out as far as like a generic tech stack for it. Of course, everyone's experimenting with their open tofu versus Terraform type stuff, and there's always going to be some divergence in approaches. But the types of scanners, I think, have settled down a little bit, and that's allowed us to do twofold. First, there's companies, especially enterprises, that adopted a lot of these technologies as they were coming out, and so they have the unique problem of, oh, what do I do now that I have like 20 different scanners? Like I've got one for my Ruby, I've got one for my JavaScript, I've got one for my Java. And then you multiply that by like the 8 different types of scanners that are out there. And then you've hit this just mass issue of like 24 scanners running across 50,000 repos. And they look at ASPM as how can I turn all of this data into actionable data? And then conversely, a lot of my experience is on the startup to mid-market approach, which it's like, I am not going to go and buy 8 different scanners to figure out what I need to do. And so I'm really looking at ASPM as now that this architecture has sort of settled, just give me the thing I need to scan and give my developers feedback on how they can improve the security of their code. And so I really think it's come as an evolution of all of that. And there's really 2 different problems that exist there for enterprise and then the mid-market stuff.
Right. Well, William, this is a discussion, open discussion, so please feel free to say anything you consider in any moment. Okay, it's not ordered, so just to feel free to participate, both of you. Maybe some of the things that James has introduced, you have seen in the when you work with your customers to define the solution, probably you see these scenarios of about a lot of different tools, problems integrating everything, this kind of details. What's your view, or what's your feeling in this sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel, just to tag along with a lot of what James said. So, a lot of times when you have all of these different scanning technologies, each one of them has a different onboarding process as well. So, when you've got 18 different scanners, for example, and each one of them is scanning a different library, or sorry, scanning a different technology. Each one of them is going to be involved in different development groups. Each one of them is going to be across your product stack in different ways. So number one, just the implementation of all of those scanning tools. But then on the flip side, where James deals primarily with DevOps organizations, I deal primarily with security, enterprise level security organizations. And they get the results back from their DevOps engineers and say, hey, okay, all right, so check in the box. We have a SaaS tool on product X. Okay, now I need to do that across all 200 of my products or all 100 of my products. Not only that, but I'm using different SaaS tools. I'm using different SCA tools. I'm using different blah, 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 rest of the tool stack as well. And that gets extremely cumbersome. Not just cumbersome, but, so a lot of times you might hear the words, some security is better than no security. But as a security engineer, I might not know, as an application security engineer, I might not know whether or not there is even security happening. Even if I have the best SaaS scanner in the world, if I don't have a way to communicate that risk up the chain of command to the person that's actually buying that product, they may inadvertently buy a different product later on, just because they don't think anything's getting done over here. And that might not be the case. It might be great. But then there's also some ideas about lacking of context and understanding. All right, so this SaaS tool is doing, scanning over here, but by the time it makes it to runtime, is that actually like a vulnerability that's live? So there's a lot of problems today in the application security space that a tool like an ASPM tool could aim to solve.
Yeah. I would like just to also introduce a different or an additional topic that is, you have mentioned a lot of tools, difficult to scale when you put something new in the field, these kind of things. But other thing that we see also is that all the management of the issues and the remediation and everything is a manual process. So actually everything the developers or the engineers receive requires time, manual effort, and it's effort that is not productive because it's just to analyze, to prioritize, to see who is the responsible for this, to communicate properly, as you mentioned, Will, also. So this is something that is time consuming, the resources are limited in the team. Something that James introduced also, the teams are using more open source, more libraries. The pace of development is even higher in the slightly. The thing is, more libraries, more pace, requires more agility, less time to analyze the security issues. Everything is manual, so it's like a snowball, let's say, that make that everything become more complex, and it's like for the teams are of more visibility, more control, more things to detect, is more work. We are not going to be able to support this. So something in that part of automating or supporting them to do the same, let's say, with less effort and to be more productive or more efficient, something that we consider also very important, is probably one of the pains of our customers also in our experience. I don't know if you also see something in that line.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge here too is that the products in this space on an individual basis have matured so quickly that I don't think people even are fully aware of how many challenges they have with like a specific SCA scanner. Might exist because like they're just using an SCA scanner that was built a really long time ago, and like it takes a really long time to run. The results are kind of bad. It requires weird instrumentation that's like hard to set up, hard to maintain. Whereas now there's a lot more modern solutions that, whether it's like integrating directly via GitHub into just creating a webhook to just scan, where you have like the instrumentation is zero, where you're just setting it up that way. and then combining that with like reachability analysis to tune down a lot of those alerts. Like within each one of these 8 different scanners that I argue exist out there, there's even a wide variation in the level of maturity of each of those. And that even goes into the workflow piece of it as well. So it can be really challenging to know, am I having this struggle because I need, like, there's some process thing breaking down, or am I having this trouble because like I'm using a specific solution here that there's now better ways to do this that exist. And it's only been like a couple years even that, like, I'm already seeing people use the language next generation SCA, which is just funny because it's like SCA was a next generation capability just a few years ago. And so it's a it's just a rapidly evolving market to try to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do see, it's one of the words I want to hone in on there, and I'll let you speak to this again, James, just because I think it's something that you have a lot of personal opinions on, but the reachability part there. So I think that one of the places where ASPM could shine is contextualization. And then that's what reachability is. It's trying to understand, specifically looking at like SCA and SaaS tools. All right, so I found vulnerabilities in the code that I made. Maybe I made some custom code or a library that I've brought in. But in both of those cases, the SCA and the SaaS tools do not have an understanding of what is actually called at runtime. So the vulnerabilities that a SaaS or an SCA tool could find theoretically would be potential vulnerabilities. They can't find vulnerabilities necessarily and understand what is the needle within the haystack. What is the golden needle within the stack of needles within the haystack, kind of a deal. So that's where tools like a runtime security type tool might be able to add additional context to it. So an ASPM tool might be able to bring that all in together. Now, as you're saying, with the next generation tools, we have started to see that with SAST and SCA tools. And I don't mean to say that runtime is the absolute answer. Runtime has its own set of problems. So if you look towards like a DAST scanner is great because it gives you runtime evidence and says, look, I sent, or 1 = 1, and I got all the SQL information back. Therefore, you're vulnerable. That's great. You didn't tell me where in the code. That's because the DAST scanner just sends an HTTP request and gets an HTTP response. It doesn't know where in the code the vulnerability is. So you started to see things like IAST and RASP, things like that pop up where you've got an agent that sits on the actual website and is able to read those things. So there's some guys and gals out there that really tout that. But an ASPM solution would theoretically be able to take that information so that you wouldn't need a next-gen version of each of these different tools. And instead, you're able to get that contextualization at the platform layer. So I'm not sure if you see a difference in those two. And I'm going to ask James here, do you see a difference in the next generation SCA and SAST, whatever type tools, versus what an ASPM type of platform could provide?
Yeah, but what's really challenging is there's just trade-offs every step of the way. So you can think of SCA platforms that do like the best kind of reachability, which would include either like internet reachability or function level reachability, where it is saying that like this function does get executed. The benefit of not doing it at runtime is that it can first of all detect it even if that function doesn't execute. Because like say it's like hidden on some public web page where like no one knows it exists or clicks on it, so it never executes. So there's some benefit to scanning left, even from a findings argument. But beyond that, the benefits obviously that you can get the results to the developer right away is the most important piece. But then at the runtime, there's other benefits there where it's a more accurate methodology of like what's actually executing or not, because you might have something that is programmed to execute, but by the time it hits the runtime, it never actually does execute. And so when it comes to a prioritization, like there's arguments even within that one small example to be made either way. And ultimately, I'm really the reachability on the one hand, I'm never going to say that I don't want it because it's always helpful. Like but ultimately it's a filter on a dashboard to do prioritization and to do filtering. So I'm always hesitant to say like, this is not the be all end all of like vulnerability management. The thing I care more about is the surfacing the fixes automatically to the right people. And so that's why I've sort of lumped in, and we'll talk about this more later even, but like what ASPM is, because of even how much that context varies between ASPM providers, it just honestly becomes really difficult to tell based on your specific organization and how you emphasize different pieces. Like if you have a really mature, great DevOps relationship, runtime tools are going to do really well for you because it's easy to like ask them to just, hey, just Helm install this agent. You're good to go, kind of get this context. But for other organizations where that relationship doesn't exist, like it's really hard to get things deployed, adding just a little webhook into your GitHub repo is a great way to get some of that context. And so really, this is even why I don't, some of the people who defined ASPM, like Phoenix Security and Armor Code early on, I don't even include them within ASPM because I think it makes more sense to call it just vulnerability management, where they're sucking in all this contextual data to help prioritize all of your vulnerabilities as a whole. And me and Francesco over there argue all the time about it. So
I agree with James that, okay, one thing is reachability, for example, that is one way more, an additional filter to to prioritize or to support the prioritization. But the context has to be end-to-end, from the developer to the cloud environment, everything, all the stages, all the system, not only SCA. You have to control the code, the CI/CD infrastructure, pipelines, everything, in order to evaluate the impact and everything. And you mentioned something before, Will, is, okay, it's important to see the different things, but to create that context, it's very important also to know all the assets you have, because in other way, you are not going to be able to associate where is the issue, what to measure the impact, to identify what's the path of attack, or the way to understand or to infer what's the impact or the priority to solve something, if it's in production, if it's exposed to internet. And even for the context, we need other attributes or other criteria that are more business oriented, that is not in the code or in the application, is known by the business people. Okay, the importance of the application for the business, or the potential impact if the application fall down. So you have to mix a lot of different things, and it's quite complex. So before even having the visibility or to create the context, even we need the visibility to discover everything and to discover all the relationships among all the different assets and the way they interact, when the place and everything. That's also that is difficult to have. You don't have, I think, good scanners that not provide only the issue, but provide additional information to extract this meta information and all this contextual information.
well, that's one of the most impressive things to me from 𝐖𝐤𝐥𝐦 was just that graph of showing the connections between the assets. Because honestly, first of all, there's not many people that even try to say they do it, of showing like it is really, really hard to say this Docker file built this container, which is deployed to this cluster. Like that code to cloud context is really, really tough to be able to create. And so being able to show that the relationships between those assets, because it's so heavily dependent on like your deployment processes and knowing like what's happening there, just getting that contextual relationship is essential for understanding the security finding you're looking at. But because so few tools even try to say that they do it, it's how I assume that it must be extremely difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to try to advance a bit. Okay, we have a lot of pains or problems and context that we have to solve to the customer. But for example, James, you wrote in some of your posts your vision of the perfect ASPM, or what an ASPM solution should consider or should provide, whatever. I don't know, maybe could you elaborate a bit here to align to everybody and to present your vision on this point?
Yeah, a lot of it is inspired by like Wiz's approach to CSPM, as like you implement this tool that gives you all of the vulnerabilities on your assets in the most painless way possible. And that core is sort of what defined like I would argue that's not actually cloud security. I think cloud security is actually the runtime detection response stuff, which is why I love what's happening with CDR right now in that area. But at the application layer is where you actually want these results, where it does like what all of these tools are doing is just scanning configuration and telling you that things are misconfigured, whether it's because they either need a patch or they need a change to encrypt something, the close a port, whatever, if it's on the infrastructure as code side. And so all this stuff is doing is analyzing a bunch of configuration data and telling you, here's the stuff you need to fix. And everything else is ultimately boils down to scanning engines, features like reachability, workflows. And each one of those things is very important and really hard to do, which is why we see such a vast array of like companies trying to take their own approach. Like, we're really good at workflows. We're really good at remediation guidance. We're really good at the scanning engines. Because ultimately, like, those are the differentiators. But ASPM, like, to me, what people want ultimately is, if I already have an existing tool, I can plug it in. If I don't already have an existing tool, you've got one for me. And it's the only solution I need to provide security feedback to my development teams on how to fix things. And so ultimately, that's those 8 different kinds of scanners that are all provided in one platform, or you can bring your own results if you have them. So that's the high level combination of all of this stuff into a single provider.
I don't know, William, that you go to a lot of customers and you have to face a lot of different scenarios. What's your perception or the perception of the customer regarding, do I need all these capabilities? May I start with something smaller? What's the minimum approach for like or something similar to an ASPM? What's your view on this part?
So a lot of the enterprise level customers, I would say enterprise, I mean, so like, I don't know, like 1,000 employees plus, like sometimes that's considered, small, medium business, 1,000 employees or so, but it depends what industry you're in, of course. But those that maybe have like more than just a few dozen applications, maybe they've got like 100 plus. We here at Tenable, we have a SaaS-based solution. And if you were to ask the question, how many web applications do we have? You would say, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 20 or something like that. And the answer is closer into 400 to 500, somewhere in that range, right? The number of web applications that organizations have probably blows, maybe not you two, maybe not the folks on this call, but maybe some people on this call might have their minds blown by that. And part of that is the number of APIs and things like that are going on behind the scenes, in addition to the actual customer-facing APIs. So when we ask the question, what are customers already investing in security there? I can pretty much guarantee you they've already got a SAST, an SCA, and a DAST product. They've already got those. They've got a secret scanner for the most part, even if they're using something that's free or open source. So I think the minimum viable product for an ASPM solution should at the very least include, James says that there's 8 different kinds of scanners. I think that it should include almost all of those scanners. I'm not sure if he agrees or not on, the number of scanners. Maybe that's something we can talk about, but I think an ASPM solution should include all of those. Now, where we disagree a little bit is he considers a vulnerability management platform the one that doesn't provide any of its own scanners. But I think that you could still consider something an ASPM solution if it doesn't provide any of its own scanners, if it has the right application security context behind it. So, for example, Zygenny provides all of its own scanners. But let's say I am talking about Phoenix, somebody that what they do is that they bring in all of their scanners. I think you can call them a vulnerability management solution, but I think you can also call them ASPM because they are providing that. Now, maybe they ingest free and open source data, so it's still incumbent upon their customer to actually choose which scanner to use. But so long as that solution is providing a methodology to actually deploy that free solution, and so long as they're providing a methodology, just a quick hook to bring that data in, even if they're not providing like a full wrapper by itself, maybe to say, hey, this is our scanner, even though it's, the artist formerly known as OWASP Zap, now just Zap, right? So even if it's, that, or maybe it's SemGrep or something like that on the SaaS side, great, that's perfectly fine. Open source, again, some security is better than none. And there are some great open source tools out there. A lot of these tools are very hard to build, so I don't knock anybody for not making their own. No problem there. But I think that, you know, all of those scanners should be considered for the MVP. Now, I would go one step further, and I'm not saying that James isn't going one step further. He did mention quite a bit of this stuff. I would also say that what's extremely important is a centralized point for integrations for getting the right vulnerability out to the right person, right? So a lot of these tools, it might be best in class SCA, it might be best in class SAST, but they each have a separate Jira integration and they each have a separate Slack integration and things like that. Wouldn't it be great if I just had one centralized spot for each of those? So I've got 8 different scanners. I want a centralized spot for my Jira integration. I want a centralized spot for my Slack integration. So I think that that's mandatory for an ASPM. That's something that a lot of my customers struggle with going across. Like, again, Tenable only has one AppSec tool, so we don't have an ASPM solution. But when I talk to them about this, so I get a lot of context around that. So that's problem. That's a big problem right there. Now, the second problem that I'll say that a lot of DevOps engineers probably aren't too aware of, I'll say, is reporting up to the CISO, and not necessarily the CISO, but maybe director of security, and director of security reporting up to the CISO and asking the question, all right, are all of our pipelines secured? Okay, so all I want is for each individual product that I have, I want a green check mark or a red X or maybe a yellow question mark, right? So I want something very simple like that that says each of those 8 scanners has been applied to this repo, has been applied to this pipeline. That's some, and the word is governance. A lot of times it's used. It's not the sexiest thing on earth, right? A lot of security engineers go, governance. No, that's the boring part, man. That's the boring part. But that's super important. Again, the CISO is the guy that's going to be paying for it. You know, they need to make sure that their investment is paying off. And I would, on top of the scanners, something else that I would like to see in all ASPM products is a method to discover web applications. And that goes towards the ASM side of the house, the attack surface management. So let's say I put in a domain, go find all of my web applications. Or, you know, based off all the repos that I have, and maybe I've got all the hooks into there, go find web applications by crawling through my repos. Things like that, I think, are also of utmost importance. And in that way, as I'm reporting up the chain of command, I can sit there and say, hey, here are the 10 applications that we have that are all, you know, within my ASPM pipeline. The pipelines are secured by the ASPM tool. Now, here's the 5 that we discovered that our marketing team just spun up out of left field, and they have nothing to do with our security tool set. So we need a method to do both of those things.
Yeah, from my or our experience, I will say that you mentioned will a centralized point to put everything together and to have a one point to analyze or to know where to start, what are the issues to solve, and those things are mandatory in all the customers. The things regarding, for example, this part of discovering everything and seeing how the web app is related with other things or other parts, it depends, or we think that is really important because of this topic of the visibility and context, but not all the customers demand that part. Maybe it's an issue of maturity of the customer, okay, that they are still in a previous stage and they want to, okay, let's manage first the issues and the vulnerabilities and those things, and then we can go further to explore more information and to go deeper in my policies or my plan or whatever. Other thing that is also critical because, for example, the number of scanners or whatever, some of them are mandatory, let's say, but others, for example, like the software supply chain, in order to analyze the CI/CD ecosystem or infrastructure as code, are not demanded by everyone, sorry. So there are like some scanners mandatory, other optional. So the stages of the software development lifecycle varies also. But one thing is also mandatory is the flexibility in the product. Beyond the number of scanners, the stages you support and these kind of things, is flexibility in several sense. That you can put, as you mentioned before, we have our own scanners for all the stages, everything, but we also support integrating the third-party solution of the customers. Because if someone if some organization has some tools deployed, it's really difficult to change that. So the idea is let's centralize everything. If you don't have something, I can provide you a very good solution for that part. If you have something and are not planning to change it, okay, let's integrate that information and let's do the same with the information that the tools that you already have or you prefer by the reason you want. And the other thing is, you mentioned at the beginning, we have to scale everything to all the applications after the proof of concept. The thing is, and how do I integrate my scanners and my points of gathering information? I need integration in the pipelines. I need ways to launch from a Kubernetes container. I have to integrate in a container image. So the flexibility to integrate the solution in different ways in your processes is also something very, very critical, because in other way it's not going to be possible to scale after the initial proof or validation.
Yeah, I think a big something you mentioned was people get hesitant to churn because they think it's going to be really hard. And I think something that the reason from a go-to-market standpoint, like ignore like practitioner standpoint, the reason I think it's attractive for a company to provide its own scanners is an enterprise will quickly realize it's actually not that hard to switch scanners. Once it sounds really scary because what you've implemented years ago is like, it's got its own container image. It's like got this complicated Docker run command and its own stage in the CI/CD pipeline, which wasn't possible to set up. It like is scanning the compiled jar like after the fact, and it's so hard to configure and whatever. But then once they've got their webhooks in there, and then you're just also doing your scanning on a webhook, it's very easy to transition at that point between, like, I don't care whose webhook based scanner. Oh, they're just using SemGrep. They're not just using, they've built their own thing. It's amazing. It's not like at a certain point, it sort of just doesn't matter anymore. Because there's so many things happening that the ease of use is what primarily comes across. But I want to go back to two things that Will said. The first was on the minimal definition. And the reason that I break it down to like SAST and SCA and secrets as sort of the minimal definition is because CNAP is sort of like this elephant in the room of like, they usually provide container scanning that's usually not great. Except Aqua, of course, because everyone's using Trivy anyways. And so like, that's why theirs is fine because it's what everyone's using. And then they also provide IAC scanning, right? And like with Chekhov and the Prisma acquisition. And so like, so those two features themselves often are covered very much at the CNAP level. And so that's why from an like a pure developer practitioner, if you're trying to say all that other stuff is infrastructure, I think that you're left with SCA, SAST, and secrets as sort of the leftovers. But that actually transitions into the other thing we were talking about, which is like what makes the difference between an ASPM and a vuln management tool. Is the reason I just call it vuln management is because containers really break like this separation of thinking of between infrastructure and application. Because if someone who's just an ASPM player wants the full application context for developers, they have to start picking apart containers, registries, and then ultimately the deployed state of the application. And at that point, there's no difference in my mind between what they're doing and what like a vuln management tool is also trying to do. They're just starting from different ends of the spectrum, where like an ASPM player is starting with the code and the code results and trying to get to the infrastructure, whereas someone like Devotion or Opus maybe started more on the runtime angle and looking at the cloud results and is trying to get back to the code as a result. And so that's why, to me, it's like the container makes it so that there's not this separation. And that's ultimately why I prefer product security, because it's this, I don't think it makes sense to have like a cloud security as oh, I just manage containers, I don't manage applications. It's like, what? That's the same. Like, what are you talking about? It's both, they're both defined as code. Everyone has to learn how to code at this point. And they both are deployed from the same pipeline. It's a pretty arbitrary segmentation to say like, oh, I only look at the Docker file, but the part where it copies the compiled jar in, like, that's that AppSec guy deals with that part. So that's my thoughts on both of those things.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I do think that as application teams have taken on more responsibility for the infrastructure itself through the IAC, I think that has started to accelerate application security teams taking on that responsibility as well. And I've seen, like, at the very largest enterprises, I will still see two different application security teams, one kind of embedded with the DevOps team, and then one still embedded with the security engineer team that's a little bit more of a traditional AppSec team that might be more red team focused. They do more pen testing and things like that. But the ones that are DevOps focused are the ones that are much more towards trying to get these tests into the actual pipeline itself. And they a lot of times aren't. I mean, maybe your experience is different here, but they a lot of times do actually look at the code and everything else. And when I say code, I'm differentiating from IAC. I don't think IAC is a good term because it's not code, in my opinion. It's just markup language, right? So I do think that, the infrastructure is code testing as well as the actual code testing itself, in my experience, has been implemented by the same team, or it's being more and more implemented by the same teams going forward, and less, deviation. These are the DevOps guys. These are the application guys, and definitely a bleeding of the two. Granted, you'll still see somebody being hired as a DevOps engineer or being hired as a developer, but they both are expected to kind of have somewhat of each other's skill set to an extent, these days.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. No, it's the same. I agree. And I wanted to ask William. You are mentioning a lot of different team configurations and different scenarios to start. According to this experience from your contact with the customer, once we identify, okay, the ASPM has these capabilities, centralized point of view, reporting capabilities, scanning with a party, we found a scanner, whatever. What are the main challenges to deploy an ASPM solution in the customer? We have introduced maybe some of them regarding flexibility or scalability or this kind of thing. But in general, what's the challenges you find when you have to deploy this kind of solution in the customers?
So to clarify, I've never deployed an ASPM solution in a customer environment. As my company, Tenable, has a DAST scanner, so I do get to talk to enterprise security teams that are application security focused. I can definitely speculate, and then James, who has actually tested many ASPM solutions, can chime in with the realities. And so here's the problem, man. But some of the I guess I'll call them objections. Yeah, I've worked with plenty of sales teams, and sales teams are a lot of times, prepped on what are common customer objections. From the application security side, I already have best-in-class tools. So one of the things that I have heard with ASPM solutions that maybe use free tools, under the hood, is that maybe those tools aren't as good as the best-in-class solutions. So when you're looking at an ASPM tool, as a customer, I would want to make sure that the customer asks the question correctly and say, hey, is this finding the most vulnerabilities? That's actually not the most important question. You should not be looking for the solution that necessarily lights up your dashboard, right? So I would say that's a solution that, that is a problem that, I would definitely work to get in front of with the customer and say, hey, you're looking for context. You're looking for what is giving you the best vulnerabilities to go fix and find, and giving you the best avenue to go find them. Sorry, not go find them, but go fix them. So step one, find the worst vulnerabilities. Step two, go fix those vulnerabilities and then validate that those are fixed. There's a whole process after that for sure. Mm-hmm. But so I would say that's probably the biggest objection that I would find. Number one is, and a lot of customers that maybe already have these solutions in place and they're not using freemium ones, but they're using paid ones, which paid doesn't mean it's better, right? It just means that you've got support. It means you've got X, Y, Z, and you don't have to wait a year for fixes, hopefully, maybe. Hopefully you got to smile
really longer.
James, maybe you.
Yeah, you probably have to wait longer as your ticket gets escalated and put on a backlog somewhere, and the CSM just cries themselves to sleep that product won't pay attention to it.
I work for a vendor. That never happens.
Yeah, every customer's number one. Yeah, I mean that's I think you're exactly right. I think the key, there's two key things here, and I think the first is what you were talking about, where when security teams do product evaluations or POCs, they're often looking at the wrong things. Like they're not the key thing, to your point.
Criteria. I finally remember the word success criteria.
Yeah. the success criteria is based on very nerdy, like how many vulns did it discover? Are they true positive versus false positive? What's the rate of false positives? And this is why I'm a huge advocate of anytime you do a POC for a security tool, fix one thing, because like that's going to actually be the metric, is how many things did we fix and how fast did we fix them. And the key metric organizations are looking at now is like time to remediate a vulnerability. And so it's important to actually test that when you're using a tool, instead of trying to get into all of this abstract stuff you're never going to actually see. And it's tough. I fall into the same trap because I have my little insecure Kubernetes testing repo that has a lot of little nerdy like exploits and like things hiding from scanners. Like, oh, maybe will 𝐖𝐤𝐥𝐦 detect that I hid this AWS access key inside of a called function or something? Like all these things that sort of test the scanner capabilities. But in reality, no matter what scanner you pick, you're going to have more vulns than you can fix. And what's important is to try, how do I make it realistic that this line doesn't just go up to the right for eternity? How do I actually get things done? And that is closely related to the implementation challenge. Because so let's say we bought a tool, we did an evaluation. Security teams often, because of the nature of what we do, like we want perfection when we deploy things. Like our whole job is best practices and trying to tell people like exactly how things should be implemented to avoid potential risks to the business. And usually what that means is like when you turn on webhook scanning, there's going to be stuff that it misses because it's not looking at the compiled artifact. So there's plenty of like potential things where it's looking at internal dependencies that maybe the scanner doesn't have access to. Excuse me. Maybe it's looking at other build artifacts that get added to the container later on. So there's plenty of little things that will get missed. And too often the answer that I've seen security teams fall into, the trap is like, oh, I'm not going to deploy anything until I get like this perfect pipeline job that I can scale automatically to new parts of the org. And I'm going to be able to sort of like mass roll this thing out and then have like command line options for developers to like tweak everything. And I want them to have configuration files in every repo where they can tweak and have these base rules. And I'm going to create documentation on how to make custom rules. I think security teams struggle with like agile methodology when it comes to our own tool deployment, which is like, look, just turn on the freaking webhook thing and it'll like, it's a one click 90% of the way there, and then worry about the 10% like later on down the road. So I've seen many organizations struggle for years to get tools deployed because they refuse to do like the simple, easy win of like, how do I just turn on the simple, like, look, this thing's going to scan with webhooks. It's not going to block builds. We're going to leave that off. And like, we're just going to get visibility and just start with that. You can turn that on in a day. But if you start trying to think like, oh, but I want to be able to block on highs and let me get engineering to agree on an SLA of how fast they're going to fix this. And let me get it set up in the pipeline with like different error codes and automations with like, how do I get a report of this? Like you're going to be stuck forever trying to deploy this thing and never get good adoption as a result because you learn by deploying it. So it's just important to start with a simple, easy deployment that gets you most of the way there.
I completely agree with James. Is one of the points that we also see is, okay, there is the 2 points. Is one is they put focus on the technical side, let's say, but okay, the success, the way to evaluate the success of the proof of concept should be okay, but how this change my operations, how I'm going to improve my day-to-day, how we are going to save time or whatever, or how we are going to cover more things with the same. So it's not only if I can integrate everything, whatever it is, okay. It's not just to integrate the scanners, it's okay, with this, you have now, for example, a way to prioritize something that you before do it manually with an Excel or whatever. Now you have everything done automatically here in real time. So you are saving tons of hours just to prioritize and to plan your weekly activities to solve the 20 or the 100 most critical issues, for example. These kind of things that impact in the business, in the operations, in the efficiency of the team. This is something that I think is changing, but it's something that is really, really critical. Yes, the other side that working in Agile, maybe we are quite used to working in an Agile way, but the corporates, the enterprises or we have everything, the all or nothing. So yeah, it's like to have, okay, you have flexibility, you can integrate whatever you want, but you have 100 is working for 90. So, okay, second phase for the other 10 that is going to be covered, but start applying from today, start having the gaining from now. And it's difficult, this mentality of the big corporates. Yeah. It's
Well,
not
that's
a technical issue now.
yeah. I mean, and Will, you might have experienced this. Like, what the thing I usually tell vendors to do is to like create. Here's all of your results that you're never gonna like care about because there's like false positives, but it's like it looks good during a POC, and then have like a one-click filter on the dashboard that's like here's what you actually are gonna care about, because security needs and day-to-day operation are very different than a POC, and I'm assuming that applies to the DAS side as well.
Always.
Where, yeah.
So one of the things that I was, that I thought about during our entire conversation is, Tenable's existed on the vulnerability management side, and while we don't do too much application security, we do a little bit on the cloud side with the recent Hermetic acquisition that you know about, and then the DAST side as well. But one of the things that I'll say is vulnerability management as a sector has been alive for a really long time. And I think there are some great lessons learned from vulnerability management, especially as we start to see infrastructure getting more and more. And this isn't new, right? Infrastructure, the IAC part, right? Everything going into code or YAML, markup languages, what have you, JSON, everything. So as infrastructure is getting more and more towards the dev side of the house, there are some lessons learned from the vulnerability management industry in prioritization, what's worked, what hasn't worked, that I think AppSec can really take on board. Just for example here, just to tell you a little bit, 30 seconds about Tenable's journey. We started in 2017 with something called vulnerability priority rating, where we started taking in feeds from all these different places. And we hired some machine learning peoples with PhDs out of Dublin and whatnot. And we shoved them into a room and said, all right, guys, make an algorithm that tells me my worst vulnerability. But it didn't take into account context of my organization. So then we started coming out with new stuff based off the criticality of the application. So this is a vulnerability that's getting hacked in the wild, or maybe there's an exploit kit that's being sold out there by some organization. So we have that information, as well as this is a super bad or super critical application. We combine those two factors together to come up with a new score. So there's been an evolution of sorts from vulnerability management that I think application security can definitely take on board. And I see the maturation happening, but I don't think it's there quite yet.
Yeah, I agree. It's very something that I think Tenable does. It's been a while since I used it. It was like the early cloud days. Was is rolling up like common defects by like what's introducing them. So like to pick an easy example is like Acrobat. Like instead of showing like a million Adobe vulnerabilities, like it's just that like the fix is go from this version of Adobe to this version of Adobe. And like that's what matters more because that's what you can do about it. To me, that's the main thing that's missing from this market as a whole is that's really hard to do still. But it's like, it's not just that we've had with SCA, just as an example for a long time, like go from this version to this version and everything will be worked. But like actually getting that done is really hard to upgrade. And so just how do you help people with the patches on the SCA side? And then on the Docker side, it's like, do I need to is there even a fix? Is the fix to redeploy this application so it just gets the latest fixes? Or is the fix to like actually change something within my Docker file that I'm doing? And a lot of companies are not actually helping with that, which I think is the more fundamental problem than reachability analysis.
Yeah. I think it's a way to skip upgrading the version, for example, of a library, because okay, in a minor version, everything should work. But when you have to do a major version upgrade, everything of compatibility is a big issue and requires a lot of effort to review everything. If you don't have the automatic testing done, if you have good automatic testing, okay, it would be even easier to validate that the change doesn't break anything. But in other case, it's a lot of effort, a lot of hours. It's really difficult to accept without reviewing everything. Yeah.
Well, that's why developers get frustrated, because they're being asked by security, and then if they look at the CVE, like, it has nothing to do. Like, I get this all the time, like with Go vulnerabilities, especially, where it's like the first line of the vulnerability description is like, this impacts Windows systems, and it's like, imagine you're a developer and you have to write a whole freaking Go migration to fix a vulnerability that applies to Windows systems. Like, it's just not.
It's part of the context. Okay, it's not only the library. It's the when the application runs, combination of different topics, operating system with some patch, with some other combination of other third-party libraries. Yeah, it's quite complex to analyze. Okay. I would like to see some other questions, but we are running out of time because we had 1 hour. Ayman, before going to Ayman, just to have the questions till the end. Maybe something just to jump to how do you see the future of ASPM, the evolution, the next steps? Today we heard a lot of artificial intelligence, automation, and these kind of things. I don't know if even you see something before all that things that could be sooner in this kind of solutions, or I don't know, in a couple of years. Where do you see these solutions?
James, you want to go first on that, or you want me to take a stab? I remember you definitely had a lot of strong opinions on this one, but
Yeah, I got distracted thinking about Aman's question.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
The question is the future of ASPM. Where do you think this is heading? And I think, I think my answer is going to be pretty short here. Listen, like, there is an A in CNAP, and I think that A has been woefully ignored by CNAP solutions. The application part, the application security part of the CNAP solution. I think that a lot of cloud vendors have not been taking application security seriously. So I do see the ASPM solution in the future starting to merge a bit more with CSPM solutions, with CNAP solutions, things like that. And I've heard before, CNAP described as kind of the intersection of CSPM and ASPM, as something right there. I think that, they survive on their own as products for now, but there's going to be a merging of all of these acronyms in the future. And what exactly that looks like, maybe it's not so much that, maybe there's another direction that it goes, but I think it has to happen because there's just too many security scanners and tools. And saying my undergrad was mathematics, so the permutations. So the permutations of these 8 scanners. So if you choose these 3, it's a CSPM. If you choose these 3, it's an ASPM. I don't think that's how it works. So I think it's going to be, if you choose all of these scanners right here, that is what an ASPM solution does. And it's going to look a lot more cloudy at that point. And it's not to say that it doesn't have its place on-prem, because all of those same solutions will still be, holding true for on-prem applications that are hosted by yourself, or maybe you pay somebody else to host. You're just not also doing IAC scanning. You're not also doing scanning, but secret scanning and everything else like that, SAST and SCA, those still work whether you're on-prem or in the cloud. I just think it's going to start to involve a lot more cloudy stuff as well.
Yep. No, I totally agree. I mean, if you want my hottest possible take, I've thought for years that CSPM should not exist as a category, because you're scanning assets at runtime for vulnerabilities that are defined entirely before runtime, and they're fixed by people who never touch the runtime. And so I thought that, like, what makes that hard is, like, there's compliance requirements to scan your runtime assets. And so that's why no one can have the James Berthotti cool kid plan of, like, CSPM-less architecture. But I think it only makes sense to scan all this stuff to the left. And I think the key, and honestly, I can tie in Aman's question here of, like, he basically asked why would I lock in with a vendor to get all these scanners when I just want something to orchestrate what I already use? And I think how quickly this space is evolving, it really, to me, a lot of the question Aman had like skepticism as part of it, of, like, just not believing that a tool could aggregate and give all this context and provide their own scanners that are also good. And I agree generally that, like, usually the tools are either have really good scanners that they're proud of in certain areas. So, like, some people are really proud of they built their own secret scanner and they're mostly an aggregator, like their SCA scanners just semgrep, like it's okay. So right now it's definitely a little all over the place, and so that's where I agree. But I think ultimately this is why this has to include vuln management plus your own scanner, because if pretend we're not skeptical and I have an amazing tool that does perfect contextualization, and then I have another tool that does perfect contextualization but also provides its own scanners as a backup, I'm always going to choose the one that has its scanners, because it's a net it's only ever a positive thing that I can get new repository coverage. Like, let's say I have this amazing SCA scanner, but it requires all these weird asterisks on like language support, whatever. Like, I need a baseline scanner that I know is going to just work and do something when I deploy a new repository, as opposed to being worried about, does my existing best-in-class tool support, this language or this deployment or this framework. So really, that's why I think down the road, it's a both and of we've created vuln management from code to cloud. We also provide our own scanners as a backup. And down the road, which you choose depends on your priorities as a business, how locked in you are, like how in love with a specific tool you are and your adoption. So right now there's a lot of details to figure out when you're choosing between providers in the space.
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern. The vendor lock-in concern is absolutely legitimate, but I think a lot of these ASPM vendors out there are focused on, even the ones that provide their own scanners do provide ways to bring in data from other sensors. So while you may think that you're locked in, right? That may pop up into your head. Yeah, that's one of those objections, right? Is the vendor lock-in. I don't think that there are going to be too many ASPM vendors out there that are only going to provide their own scanners and no method for bringing other data in from other sources. Hopefully, that's where the industry is headed as well, is not just like a one-stop shop. And then you either can put this in your pipeline or you can't, and you need to change your pipeline to accommodate. But instead, you've got a flexible enough tool that says, all right, so you can use the open source scanner over here, you can use this paid scanner over here, and things like that.
Yeah, I agree that the thing is not ASPM, is precisely what 𝐖𝐢𝐥𝐦 is putting there, is put everything together and support how prioritize, how to manage all the things together. The thing is, if the ASPM solution is flexible enough, should not be a problem, because they are not going to vendor lock in your solution. You are going to be able to select, if you don't like the scanner from the ASPM provider, you can integrate any other open source, a third party, other paid. Okay, the thing is, okay, this specific scanner is not going to provide the global view, the context, the put in reference with the other issues from other stages or other tools. So yeah, precisely the value.
Ultimately, it's because companies are smart. Like, honestly, the vendor lock-in is from existing players who are afraid to launch their own ASPM platforms because it cannibalizes their own product. Like, if I've had a SaaS SCA solution that's already extremely well adopted and I'm legacy, I'm not going to want an ASPM that allows you to integrate newer players that have better point solution scanners than me on specific things. So I think that vendor lock-in concern is real on like the big existing company side. But startups in ASPM, they want you to adopt their tool, and so they have a high incentive to integrate. And the real money and opportunity is in the data, anyways. So like whether or not if everybody's, first of all, if all the container scanners are using Trivy anyways, and a lot of the tools are using semgrep anyways, like the difference between scanners is not going to be that high. But like most ASPM vendors, especially startups, are very happy to get that data and correlate it for you. And everything they're doing is in response to potential objections people might have. Oh, I don't need to buy this because I need an SCA scanner first. They need to be able to say, oh, well, we have an SCA scanner. Or I already have all this stuff. I just want something to orchestrate. Oh, well, good news. We also do that. And so I think they have a big incentive to be diverse with who you're bringing in and stuff.
Yeah. What other evolution I see beyond these integration capabilities or these things is the way of developers consume information, or the way these tools support developers. for remediation, as James introduced, is the critical part. You can have a lot of things, a lot of discoveries, a lot of insights, but if you don't solve it, it's like doing nothing. So at the end, the final objective is to solve the issues and to support the developers or the DevOps to solve the things. So probably, I don't know how close is the automatic remediation of everything. Probably we need some time, but for sure we have to be closer to the developer, to be in their tools in the day-to-day support and provide this context information in that part. When possible, remediate is if it's a configuration, okay, change the value of the configuration. But for things that are more complex, provide all the context to reduce the time the developer needs to understand where he has or she has to do the change, or if they have to do something or whatever, just to mitigate this effort and to support in this way. This is an important part also.
Yep.
I just want to say congratulations to the entire group here. We went the entire call without mentioning AI once.
Well, that's because we just brought up at the end. The auto patching stuff is super interesting to me. That's all using LLM stuff. So that will be coming. And what's interesting to me is they have a great sales pitch, because it's like, we have patches for you. You can take them or not. It's a question of how much do you want to pay for that. It's not a question of do you want it. Like, obviously you want it. It's just how much do you want to pay for it.
And that's one of the biggest problems in AppSec right now, right? Is not just like, upgrading patches and stuff like that, but, actually fixing code. And if you've seen code from, that's been output by ChatGPT, like it's not good. Like I've seen like entry-level developers like try and like slap code together, and it is just, it doesn't even compile. It doesn't work. It's yeah. So it's going to take some time.
Yeah. I think these models or this approach for the AI, I think can be a support for explain things to developer, because they explain things quite well and they can provide a lot of details and these kind of things. But for discovering issues, I think that we still need some time and some training, because they still doesn't have or understand all the context and all the things. But yeah, in the long term, for sure, we'll see something in that line. Okay, I don't know. See if we have on the time. I don't know if there is any other questions from the.
Yeah, there's the Amon's follow-up here. That honestly, I think comes down to each organization and your priorities. And this is why I think ASPM has to mean either if you have a gap, we'll fill it with our own solution. But if you want best of breed, like look at especially DAST is like the thing that nobody cares about right now, because I think DAST is super important. I think it's still valuable. I love what like next generation API security people are doing with it. But DAST has such a like weird state in the industry that like even those companies have had to rebrand as API security when they're like still like it's DAST. And so it really comes down to your existing budget, your existing time. Like, is it at the end of the day, the ASPM is the thing that becomes like, this is the heart of our security program. And then it becomes, do I want better API discovery and testing? Well, then let me go evaluate some tools to do that, and then bring them into my ASPM when they're scanning. And so I that's why I think it matters to be flexible either way. Because you're right that sometimes a point solution is better. It's all just a question of marginal utility. It's like, how much am I giving up and how much am I going to have to pay for it to use a point solution that's really good at this specific thing that matters to me. And I think on the DAST side especially, that's where it's the most tempting, because most ASPM providers have not included DAST. 𝐤𝐥𝐦 was a weird exception, which is why I thought it was weird that GitLab bought them, because I was like, is GitLab going to start doing like agent-based DAST testing? But other than that, DAST is not usually included within the ASPM packages.
Yeah, it's a DAST. Like, sorry, go ahead. Jesus, go ahead.
No. It was just to agree with James.
I was just gonna say,
it's like the forgotten part.
Yeah, so there's a bit of Dast is definitely more of like a right-hand side versus a left-hand side thing. It's very difficult to get into a pipeline, right? It's something that's runtime. It takes a long time to do. There are some vendors that have tried to do it. So Stackhawk comes to mind, where they use Zap under the hood, and then their platform is basically trying to square, hole, round peg into the pipeline. To your point, how much value do you actually get from Dast in the pipeline? Questionable. Just because, again, in order to get this thing that takes 5 hours to scan normally, to scan in 10 minutes, which is more DevOps friendly, you have to take a lot of the checks out. You have to, a lot of what a Dast scanner does is it renders the actual live application as a browser. Okay, so I can't do that anymore because that's extremely time consuming. So if I'm not rendering it, how much value am I getting? And to your point about the API solutions, that's exactly why, is because with API security, you take out all the browser analysis and you focus your checks just on certain fuzzing things. So that's why a lot of Dast scanners have gone API. Just as a quick, primer behind the scenes of why that happened. It's because Dast scans take 5, 6, 7 hours, sometimes days. I ran into a customer where it took 5 days to scan their website. That's not good for DevOps.
Well, from a product point of view, James, also from my view, also that if I have to prioritize, for example, SCA is in almost all the customers. Okay, but Dast is more difficult to find that kind of solutions in the customer, so has a very less priority when we have to analyze what to integrate in the core or what do you support. Okay. Always has less priority because it's more difficult to find or to have this requirement from the customer's point of view. So maybe because of that, also the ASPM solutions is like, okay, the last connector.
Yeah. Well, it's to Will's point. It comes down to the instrumentation difference and the confusion around it. As far as like Will and I will probably have to do a separate podcast on Dast, because I was staying away from it just to avoid like the Tenable pieces of. I just mean as far as like trying to describe Dast is its own beast at the moment, because people are debating exactly what you brought up. Like sometimes you want a web crawl that is maybe missing stuff and but also not, like it's just doing something different, is really probably the best way to describe it. And something like Stackhawk has a higher implementation time because of like you're doing, which is usually the main barrier to entry, is like everyone agrees if you can scope to every API in your endpoint a specified scan, like that's going to give you better results. The hard part is the instrumentation trade-off between like a traditional Dast where I just set it up and I give it a credential and then it just sort of runs, and I never have to deal with it, versus configuring it within pipeline is a bit larger of a step. And then you've got people like Escape that are doing something a little in between, where they are picking apart the public version of the app, but they're also allowing instrumentation in pipeline. And then even a layer beyond that, you've got people treading what is the line between API discovery, Dast, and runtime defense. Something like Impart, like going as far as to include an eBPF agent inside your cluster that is reading the network logs, constructing API documentation. Levo also does that. And so it's just the instrumentation methods have different trade-offs, and it's so all over the place that to summarize, I don't blame ASPM vendors for not treading into that water.
Yeah, it's complex. To your point, there are a few points made between Jesus and yourself on. So you see SCA everywhere, literally at every customer that I go to. SCA is known as super important, and it's a lot easier to hook in. But what even is Dast? Again, we don't have to go over into everything. And what the heck is this? Oh, it's automated pen testing. Okay, interesting. But yeah, so no name security was just picked up by Akamai for how much? Yeah, it's like the API security space in and of itself is huge, clearly. So if you can start to incorporate that into an ASPM tool set, that those little pieces like there, whether it's API security having to do with API discovery, understanding what configuration files for the API. So for example, if it's RESTful, you want a Swagger file for that API, being able to hook in with API gateways and things like that. I don't necessarily expect my ASPM solution to do that itself, because I think that's a very tough thing for an ASPM solution. Again, No Name was just bought for 500 mil. I don't expect a startup ASPM to build that themselves. I expect them to start bringing that data in, though. So do I expect an ASPM vendor to be able to handle SaaS, DAST, SCA, API security? Yeah, I do expect
everything.
Yeah, I expect them to bring that data in at the very least. And I would like if they can provide all their own scanners, sure.
Thank you very much. Just to try to close, I don't know, you want to say something just to summarize your main ideas or the things you take from the discussion, or?
No, I'm just excited to do another one with Will on DAST and API security. Yeah, I mean, I think ASPM, I'll just close with my hottest take. I don't think CSPM should exist. I think ASPM is really what we've been talking about this whole time, which is looking at configuration of assets for vulnerabilities. And then you should have one tool for your developers that tells them how to fix misconfigurations. And you should have a tool for your cloud security SOC team to do actual runtime defense of your assets. So that's really how I separate the industry more and more. And I think there's asterisks to that depending on like your specific business. But at a high level, for most cloud architectures, I think that general way of thinking makes sense.
William?
Yeah, I'm also excited for the future of ASPM because, I said earlier, there's an A in CNAPP, and that thing has been neglected since CNAPP became a thing. So can you really say that it's application protection if you're ignoring the application and you're just talking about scanning the infrastructure and the secrets and things like that? I don't think so. So I'm excited to see ASPM grow to start to swallow some of that responsibility itself.
Right. Just from my side, it was a pleasure to learn with you about your views, your understanding, and your experience. Just a few ideas for people that is thinking or is considering to start or to analyze an ASPM solution. That it's important, the technical part, but it's not the most important thing. A good solution of ASPM is not going to limit in the scanner you can use. So what you have to search for is, as James commented also, is the outcome, how it's going to improve your day-to-day, how it's going to contribute to reduce time, to solve things easier, sooner, and this kind of thing. This is the most important part. That is what ASPM provides on top of those huge amount of scanners that you already have in the organization and these kind of things. Start with this, what we have today, because in the future we are going to have more remediation capabilities, more protection capabilities, more automation, and start by phases, apply every place where you can do the more complex things is in a future stage, but start doing some steps and applying and learning, because it's something that is going to start and is going to evolve. So that are my main ideas for these questions. So thank you very much, Will, James, and thank you very much to everybody for attending today to this coffee talk. We appreciate your time and your engagement today. So stay tuned for more updates. Follow the recording, the main ideas that we'll share with you, for example. And I hope to see all of you in the next edition of our Sacred Talks. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.